Hello, Laura Donnelly here with Dancing with Ease, Body Brain Balance, and another edition of the Healing Path. So I do these when my lovely, lovely guests and colleagues are able to come on when it fits their schedule. And the purpose of the Healing Path is to share with people all the different modalities that there are for healing. Some are traditional medicine, and some are alternative, and some are really intuitive. But the main, really important thing that holds this whole conversation series together is the understanding and the idea that all healing starts within us and ripples outward. It's an intention, this healing, this intention to allow healing to happen. And then I know our guest today, Cathleen, Elle, will share about this. But a lot of times that healing, when it happens, doesn't look exactly like we imagined it would in the beginning of the journey. So I'll bring Cathleen onto the broadcast and she'll tell you a little bit more about herself. Hey, Cathleen.
Hi, Laura. Great to be here with you today.
I'm so glad you could visit and share your work with people, what you're doing, how you got to be where you are, the healing that has happened in your life, because I know it was a big challenge.
So where I am today is I am a loss expert that assists people in moving through their healing journey so they can feel joy, love, peace, and connection again. And how I got there was in 2010, my son took his life. Not only did he take his life, but he also was angry at me when he transitioned and wrote a note saying that he didn't want me at his service. Oh, wow. So when I found out that he didn't want me at his service, I was even more shattered than what I already was. And I just found myself lying upon my son's grave, just begging and wishing and pleading, whoever or whatever took my son, please take me too, because I can't do this anymore. And then I just had this clear, it wasn't a voice, it was just words, that came to me and said, if this happened in your life, then you're meant to do something with it. Now do it. And so it was at that point in my life that I decided that I'd step into it. And how, why it was so important that if it happened in my life, then I'm meant to do something with it. I spent, more than 25 years of my adult life as a legislator, as a government official, as a lobbyist, as the CEO of a commercial construction contractors association. And so I had the contacts, I had the media outlets, I had the voice that could actually bring light to suicide, to the challenges that we struggle silently with. And so I used that experience for me to start to speak out about suicide, about mental awareness, mental, emotional and mental wellness. And then I realized I wasn't taking care of myself. That each time I spoke out on a public forum, each time I was on TV or on a radio show, I would literally be out for days and sometimes a week at a time because it crushed me. I was re-victimizing myself over and over again because I had such blame and such shame inside that if I could be a public servant in the way I was, how could I not save my son's life? And so I held myself very responsible for his transition. And I knew eventually that I needed to step into my healing journey. And so I started, 1 hour at a time, 1 day at a time, 1 week at a time. I started to step into cognitive thought therapy and then I found energy healing, which really shifted my life completely. And the energy healing that I actually am a master in today is part of my healing journey that really shifted my life in a way that what I didn't say, as a child, early childhood, I was born and raised up until about 5th grade in an abusive alcoholic home where my father physically and emotionally abused us. And I was sexually abused before the age of to, not by him, but, and so I've had plenty of trauma in my life, and, it all goes back to the connection. So I have a couple things that are swirling around in my head right now, but it all goes back to the connection to a higher power, a higher source. And even as a child, I remember thinking there's got to be something more to life than this. Like there's got to be something more. And I also know today that had I not experienced the trauma that I did from early childhood up through to an adult, I wouldn't have had the strength to survive my son's suicide. And so I get to see it differently today than what I did, because I've chosen to step into the energetic healing of past wounds, of the emotional blocks and the trauma that's stuck in my soul. And as I work through all that, I realized that there's more to the story than what I even knew and still know today. And so I think it's really about being connected to source, being connected to the energy. And Logan's transition has really opened my eyes to the ability to continue to live even if your physical being's no longer here. So I always say Logan's transition was just that. It wasn't a death. Logan's physical being did die. He's no longer here. There was pain involved in that, and I had to move through the pain. And yet his energetic presence is all around me, and I got to learn how to create a new relationship with my son in a very different way. And if it wasn't for the connection, I'm not so sure how life would be today. And I know that now, as I look back, that I always had that connection. I was just seeking on the outside for approval, for worthiness, for whatever, when it was really always on the inside.
It's so powerful. I mean, your whole story is incredible.
Thank you.
Because when I see you, when I meet you, one of the things that you exude is joy. And that for me is really a clear message that you have, what do I want to say, transformed this energy of sadness and despair and loss. And it's not that you didn't feel all those things for a long time.
Right.
But the way in which now at this point you have access, that's a noisy thing. The way that you have access to more of you. And also I also loved earlier in your story how you said you had this platform and you had gone out and you were meeting and sharing and talking, and the idea that that the mission was so important, but you weren't that important in terms of how you took care of you, and coming back to your personal healing so that you could be more effective as a healer and guide for other people who suffer this tremendous loss.
Yeah, Laura, I have to say that it wasn't a cognitive thought for me. It was just like I had a mission, I had a purpose, I had to make something out of the pain that I was living. Like I had to have something had to keep me going. And if Logan's life was to save another life, then I had to do it. And that was the thought, and I wouldn't change that today even. And I often say to those who are moving through any kind of grief journey that they're in right now, whether it's the loss of a job or change of a life or a divorce or whatever it may be, nothing is too small to go through a grieving journey or a healing journey of that. But I often say it's not linear at all. Like I describe it as, first, it feels like quicksand because every step you take, you feel like you're going deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. And yet, what I have found that each time that I decided to step through my fear, to step through into my feelings and through them, it felt more like an ocean. Sometimes it's very calm and sometimes there's little waves and other times there's a tsunami, like sometimes you feel like you're being pulled under and being held underneath there. And I've realized that the times that there are the roughest, the times that I feel like I'm drowning, the times that, or felt like I was drowning, was when I was drowning in my own suffering. We do not have to suffer. And what causes suffering is the limiting beliefs. It's the self-sabotage. It's the judgment of others or yourself. It's the shame. It's all those words that we in society tend to think that we can't think about. So we have to either shove them aside or bury them, mask them with whatever kind of mask that we want to mask them with, whether it's drug and alcohols or overworking or overeating, undereating, overexercising, not exercising at all. Like there's all kinds of masks that we create in society. And a pill's not going to fix your grief. It's just not. You have to be willing, or I had to be willing. You don't have to do anything that you don't want to do. But I had to be willing to step into the pain that I was experiencing so I could eventually figure out that the light that I was seeking on the outside, husbands, jobs, churches, like whatever it was, everything I was seeking on the outside was actually shining on the inside. I just couldn't see it because I had so many layers over my own light. And so once I started to really work through the pain, the suffering, the limiting beliefs, I started to be like, I have a light. Like my light is connected to source. We all have a light. We're all connected to source. We're all connected. And once we move through the muck of a pond or whatever you want, a swamp, whatever you want to think of it, once we move through all that, we are free. We're free because we realize that we carry the love within that we're all seeking on the outside. Yeah. We're free. Now, that doesn't mean we have an easy life and nothing, goes wrong, which I don't believe anything really goes wrong. When there's challenges in our life, it just presents opportunities for us to move through it and to listen to the guidance that we're being guided with.
So I can imagine that at the beginning you had no idea that you would end up here where you are.
None at all.
And what you also said so clearly is that you just knew the first step at the beginning, just the first step. And that's part of, I think, for everybody, a healing journey is that you take one step at a time.
Yeah.
And the next step shows up after the first step. And it's sometimes we don't want to do something because we can't see where it's going.
Right.
But once you connect to that inner light, for me, that fear of where it's going disappears. Because I know it's going to take me to the right place. The right place for me, the right next step, the right choice, the right opportunity. And I really love, I was thinking at the very beginning of your story is that I wonder if there's anybody who hasn't lost somebody to suicide.
Oh, well, there's probably someone that has, but I've read some statistics that shows that every suicide that occurs, which there's every 11 minutes, there's a suicide in the United States, there's a suicide. So every suicide that occurs, there's at least 135 people who are touched by that suicide. Now, it used to be only 8 people or something very minimal, like it's a very small group of people who are actually touched by suicide. I can't remember the exact number, but it was very minimal. And so think about every suicide, every 11 minutes, 135 people are changed by a sudden unexpected loss that's traumatic, that can be prevented in a sense that when we start to walk through our pain and allow ourselves to feel through it, then you can prevent some of this intense suffering that so many people go through. So And that's just suicide. That's nothing to do with drug overdoses or car accidents or heart attacks, or there's sudden losses that are happening on a regular basis.
So, do you think that the grief process for somebody, okay, there's sudden loss, which is just, it just comes out of the blue. But then do you think the type of sudden loss changes how people grieve? Or is just grieving an individual process?
So any journey that has grief in it is different. So it doesn't matter who you are, there's a very different process because each of us have different experiences. So we see it from a different lens. So grief is different for everyone. We all go through similar experiences, but grief is different for everyone. I will say there's actually a difference between sudden loss and sudden unexpected loss. So sudden loss could be that you are diagnosed with, I'm just going to say cancer, and within 3 weeks you're gone. That's sudden loss. That's a type of sudden loss. Sudden unexpected loss is when you either kiss your husband goodbye in the morning and then they're gone, never coming back, or you have a situation like me with suicide, that my son wasn't speaking with me and all of a sudden he's gone. So there's no ability to say goodbye. And then there's the loss, that the prolonged loss. And each of them have a different process. Like each of them touch you in a different way. Sometimes it's really hard to see someone struggle and have a long drawn out loss, the journey of leaving this earth, physical journey of leaving this earth. That's tough in and of itself. Sometimes you're the caregiver. So it's very different. Every grief journey is different. What is the same is there's the what ifs, if onlys. There's the I wish. There's all the things that we struggle through. It's getting used to not having their physical presence. It's the holidays. It's the anniversaries. It's part of our journey. And so I also say that life is a journey, and there's events in our life that happen on a regular basis, and that starts to build who we are, how we respond to other things that happen in our life. And grief is just that. It's another part of our journey. And so we can be stuck in the suffering and have that dictate how we live our life. Or we can choose to step into that grief, to step into those feelings, the pain, the trauma, the guilt, the shame, the blame, whatever it is. We can step through those. We can walk through those, so where we can actually live the light that we are and the purpose for the heart's calling for why we're here today.
Yeah, my friend Alice is watching, and she said a lot of times there is guilt for things that were left unsaid.
Yeah.
Or guilt for things that were said.
Right. And so what if you had the opportunity to be able to express those things, or express your sorrow, or you can express your anger for what they had said. There's multiple ways that we can see any particular situation. And I am a master healer in what's called regenerating images and memory. And that is one of the modalities that really helped me move through some limiting stories that I'd created, and create the programs that I'd created in my head and in my body. I was able to go back and re-see or recreate a situation, so where there was much more awareness around the story had created, that really created a new story. And I'll give you an example. When I was 3 or 4 years old, my father came home drunk. My mother started complaining, like there was that back and forth. And then they started to get aggressive, and it got louder, and it got more boisterous and more abuse, the physical abuse. And then my father, blurts out, I'm going to end this. I don't know his exact words, but basically, I'm going to get the gun and I'll take care of this. So he literally started walking up the stairs to load his gun to shoot us. And so my mother brings us into the bathroom, and my mom and sister are placed in the bathtub. My sister was 3 years older than I was. And then my mom put me separate from my mother and sister between the toilet and the wall. At that moment, as a 3 or 4-year-old, my program in my head was, what about me? I'm unworthy to be protected. I'm not lovable. What about me? You know, that's the program that was put into my head at that time. He proceeds to shoot through the door, empties the barrel, and then goes to reload again. And my mom was able to get us out the door, to get us in the car. And as we're backing out of the driveway, he comes out with a gun and starts shooting again, hits the tires. We go up the road, not very far. As a 3-year-old, I'm like, keep going, keep going, keep going. And my mom had to stop because the tire was blown out. And then we hear the sirens coming, and because it must be the neighbors had heard the shots. Cops are there. We go back to the house. The cops say, we're going to have to take him away. And at that moment, my body's like, I can remember the relaxation in my body. Okay, great. I'm going to be safe. Then I hear my mom say, no, don't do that. Let me go check and see if he's passed out. If he's passed out, he'll be okay in the morning. And so the program again was, I'm not worthy. I'm not protected. You know, so there was a program that was created there. This is a longer story, but I think it's important to be shared, because from that point to the point of actually moving through my journey of stepping into the energy of what's stuck in my soul after Logan's transition, that's, 40 years difference, it was 40 years. And as I started to go back, there's this program, this modality, this healing modality, I was able to go back into that situation. And I was able to see that in that particular moment, my mother did the best she could. There wasn't enough room in the bathtub for all three of us to be in there. So the most safest place for the smallest one of the three was between the toilet and the wall. And so she kept us, all of us, as safe as she could. She was willing to be separated from me to make sure I was safe. And then she was willing to say, back then, there wasn't the services that we have today. So she was willing to be beaten yet again and again and again, so she could be sure that she could keep her children, that her children wouldn't be taken away. And let me go a little further on this. And the reason why that was so important, it's important for every mother. And when she was pregnant for me, she lost her only son to SIDS. So she had already lost a child.
Right. So then there's this cannot lose another.
There was this visceral response of, I have to go through whatever I have to go through so I can keep my children. And so you can tell there's a very different connotation. Your first hearing of the story is resentment, anger, what's wrong with her, blame, judgment, there's all kinds of stuff. But then if you're able to go back and see it from a new perspective, see it from their perspective, you can hold so much more compassion and love and just gratitude for the willingness to be beaten like she was in order to keep us. It's a very different feeling within your body. It's a different feeling within your soul. And it creates a very different relationship with your loved ones here on earth and not, physically on earth and not. When you're willing to step through the journeys like that. And yeah, is it tough? Yeah, it's not easy to step into that, 1 hour at a time. That's what it takes. A session is like 1 hour at a time. When I went through cognitive thought therapy with my counselor, Brooke, that was the first step that I took. And she was wonderful. We did journaling and we did all kinds of stuff. And I went through post-traumatic stress therapy. And that post-traumatic stress therapy wasn't about my son's transition. It was about what I didn't actually work through as a child. of the programs that I had created in my head that I was living by today. So it was almost like, every step I took, there was a bear chasing me. Like anything that happened, my reaction was like, oh, I got to protect myself. I got to protect myself. And it was really literally, I don't want to do that. It could be so simple as someone and for me, that was rejection. Like I was being rejected from the littlest things. But in fact, I wasn't at all. It was a program that I had.
Or like a frame through which you look at, and you look backwards, and all the things that happened, coloring the colors on that frame, that picture that way, because that's what you're looking for.
Yeah.
And when you open that and expand it to a different direction, then suddenly, like you said, you can see something from a different point of view.
Yeah.
And you have and I imagine you have more compassion for yourself.
Well, that's really what it comes down to, Lori, is that when we don't have compassion for others, it's usually about the lack of self-worth, the lack of respect for ourselves, the lack of compassion for ourselves. And often it just is a space of really being hard on ourselves based on what we have experienced in life. And I have to say, I could focus on all that trauma, and I could focus on some pretty amazing things in my life. I was elected at 29 years old as a legislator, not even knowing which party I belonged to when I decided to run. I didn't have a college education. I owned and operated businesses with my former husband. I served on judiciary and appropriations. I got to work for the governor. I mean, there's all kinds of just beautiful things in my life. I had 2 amazing children with their dad. I did divorce them after my first legislative session. And that's okay, because I wouldn't have been there had it not been for him. And had I not met him, I wouldn't have been a legislator. I wouldn't have done all the public speaking that I did. I wouldn't be here today being comfortable to do the public speaking that I'm speaking about, had it not been for that experience with him. And so I just see my life as like a strawberry rhubarb pie. We all, if you haven't had a strawberry rhubarb pie, there's lots of sweetness and there's a lot of tartness, so it's the contrast, the sweet and tart. And I see that as life. We have these experiences so we can grow and be the best person that we can be, or we have the experience and continue to go in that downward spiral and live in that suffering of the pain we experience. It ends up being all for nothing. Because we keep causing it, we keep creating it, and so today when things happen that doesn't feel good to me, because let me tell you, it still happens. I still have relationships in the world, so obviously there's going to be some differencing of opinions, and so when challenges, bubble up to the surface, I see them as that. I see them as an experience and say, okay, what about this that I get to learn from? What about this am I not honoring myself about? And what kind of judgment is going on inside me? So I get to ask myself several questions before I actually even respond to the other person, which is different than what I've done in the past, let's just say.
It's a different process that you do, but it starts with the same place that I do. And it's really the only thing we can change is ourselves.
Right.
We can't change these things that pile on from outside.
No.
And there's a lot we can't prevent from happening. But how we respond to it, that's where we have the nuances, the points of change, the places of growth. And I think that's where all the healing happens too.
Yeah.
Is, I know people think sort of like I'm like Pollyanna, always the glass is half full, and I'm like, well, no, it's also half empty, but it's both things. It's not either or. And when I allow it to be both,
Yeah.
If I need the glass for something else and I have to get rid of the water, well, it's half empty. That's great from that point of view.
Yeah. And so I see it actually, Lori, even go further. You cannot be of service if you're only half operating.
Oh, true.
So serve people from the overflow of your full glass. So you're never half. It's always serving from the overflow. So if you're full and you're serving from the space of I want to do this, not out of I'm obligated or I'm responsible to. You're serving you, which you're serving the world with the overflow. And I love what you said, Lori, about changing your response. One of my mentors and just good friend, Jack Canfield from Chicken Soup for the Soul, I studied with him, and I've been an assistant for him, a couple different live things that he's done. And he lives by this formula called E plus R equals O. There's events in our lives that occur that we have no control over whatsoever. It's our response to those events that creates our outcome, which is how we live our life. And if we don't like the outcome and how we're living our life, then we have to change our response. The only thing that we have control over whatsoever in that formula is our response to the event.
Yes, perfect. I think that's a lovely place for us to close. So people can find you on your website. I will add the other links on Facebook. If you have questions and you wanted to comment here, this will be in the Healing Path private group, and Cathleen can answer you there because a lot of times things about grief and loss are personal.
Yeah. And please tag me on your comments. Please just, type in my name so I know that you actually have a question or a thought or whatever, and I'd be happy to respond.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Lori.
It's so great to spend some time with you and to hear a little bit more about your journey and how you transformed things that could have hung you up for your whole life.
Yeah.
And
well, one of the things I want to just offer is for people to take a look at Shattered Together, A Mother's Journey from Grief to Belief. It is the book that Logan and I wrote together. This is it was channeled as well. And it's my story of healing of each chapter has a little practice at the end of the chapter. So where it's a little inspiration, it's self-help, and it's a little bit of my journey. So you have a little more idea of what's happened. So it's the healing book. It is not the grief book. So you can use this in any aspect of your life.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. And
Thank you.
Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you. You too. Thank you, Lori. Looks like I am live.